Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. Seems like a reasonably hot topic. We've not hit a record on registrations, but we've certainly got a significant number of registrations for today. So thank you for making some time, and let's make sure we hit that Q&A as we go through. So today is all about the Eloqua preference management concept. We've called it a masterclass because the other factor we need to think about today is upcoming Australian federal government legislations around the Privacy Act. So we'll expand on that, but let's jump in and have a look at what's on our agenda. So first of all, welcome. We're then going to dive into the Privacy Act, explore that a little bit with just the information that we know so far, which is not a lot because we need to actually see the Act to make decisions. And we don't get to see that until around August, apparently. But then flowing from that, it makes perfect sense to talk about preference management, and your subscribers want choice. And so we want to be able to help you achieve that. What sort of data should you collect? That's an interesting question because that may well change a little bit in August, but let's get some of the basics down. And then using that data to tailor campaigns and the way you communicate with people throughout the different campaigns that you run. And then, of course, Q&A and release 24B overview, but it's 24C that we're looking forward to. Part of what we do at Marketing Cube, we'd like to also make an acknowledgement of country, and I begin today by acknowledging the Gadigal people, the traditional custodians of the land on which we broadcast from today, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people online with us today. So welcome everybody. Good to have you with us. So general housekeeping, as you know, we use Zoom to host our webinars. All replays are available through our blog. You can access that at marketingcube.com.au. And the Q&A function is for you. So keeping in mind it is public, everybody can see the questions you propose, and you can, of course, upvote any of those if you have the same question. If you wanted to ask a private question, go ahead and use the chat, and that's a good segue to let you know that Adrian Jones, our CEO, is on the line, and Adrian's helping me today with some of those questions and the chat. So keep him busy is my request to you. Thank you. All right, so let's dive in. The Australian Privacy Act, and what can we expect in August, and how do we know it's August? Well, I'll tell you how we know it's August. But there's certainly some changes coming up, and it's hard. You're hard pressed to watch the news in Australia, at least at the moment, without something happening, whether it's a hack or whether it's information being stolen or companies being fined for spamming, and the list kind of goes on. It seems to be a fairly regular occurrence, and obviously a timely point for us to make some changes. And for those of you who are joining us from New Zealand or Singapore or India, Malaysia, China, etc., whoever's on the line today, if you're marketing to people within the Australian market, then this is something that you need to be aware of as well. We anticipate, very similar to the GDPR. At the end of the day, look, we're all consumers. And as I said, hacks seem to be a fairly regular affair. I read just yesterday that the big four banks here in Australia are claiming that they're pretty much under attack every hour of every day. And I personally had this experience on the weekend. I was out shopping, doing the groceries, got an SMS message from my bank saying, hey, look, there's a suspicious expense. I log into my online banking and I can see two $0 transactions, one from Italy and the other in the United States. I was clearly in Marrickville in Sydney, so it wasn't me. So I called the bank, of course, cancelled the card, etc. But these things are just frustrating. They're time consuming, and people expect brands to manage this. And I was, obviously delighted that the bank had picked that up and contacted me as quickly as they did. So that was good news. The other challenging part for most of us is the level of attention the ACCC obviously, and you don't ever want to get a phone call from the ACCC, right? We had a lunch with a client or a prospective client just recently who shared with us that they'd received a warning from the ACCC, and they had to go through a fairly extensive process to alleviate the ACCC's concerns, but also adjust and change some business processes that they had in place as well. So they're onto it, and we need to do something about it as brands, and we need to be smarter in what we're doing. So what do we know so far? Look, the government, it actually kind of started with the ACCC in a report in 2019 into digital platforms. as you can see there is the final report. And so published in 2023 was a report which they titled 2022, which I thought was a bit odd, but anyway. So the Privacy Act Review Report. Now it's clearly, fabulous bedtime reading if you've got your iPad out and you scan through. But if you don't have time to digest that, there are some tools and things that we've got in place to help you with some of the summary pieces of information that we know so far. So they put out the review. Then the government issued a response to that review. And so there was another publication. And that publication was released in February last year. And so that one became, it's got a lot more detail, and there's certainly a lot of wonderful partners and teams at Australian law firms who are digging into this and have published some really interesting insight to give us a bit of a heads up as to what we might expect and what those changes will be. To help you with that, what we've done is we've built out a microsite, a resource center, essentially, to assist you trying to stay up to date with this information, because there is so much information. Now, of course, we won't know the hard facts until August, which is when the legislation apparently is being presented to Parliament, which we only found out earlier in May. So not much notice, but still. So I'll give you a QR code here in a second that you can scan if you'd like to subscribe. So in the spirit of the Privacy Act and managing these things, what we've actually done there is create a brand new email group within Eloqua, which is called Privacy and Governance, and that's something that you can subscribe to. So everyone that's on the call with me today, you've obviously already opted in to hear from Marketing Cube. So in all intents purposes, we could just send you this information, but I figured it'd be much more effective for you to choose for yourself. If this is something that you feel is quite pressing, then you can go ahead and subscribe. So here's the QR code for you to have a little look at. And there are a number of media agencies and sources that are reporting quite well on this. And one of them is MI3, which is largely focused in the technology space. And this is where we found out. It was literally this newsletter from them that I received that referenced this conversation, apparently, with the Attorney General and the Prime Minister, that August seems to be the date for when the Act will be introduced into Parliament. So that's where we get that from. What else do we know? So there are a few early indicators of things that we can expect. We can expect the Privacy Act to be similar to the GDPR, which is the EU's answer to what we're proposing to changes for our Australian Privacy Act. Now, that includes, so far from what we can understand, things like the right to be forgotten. So not only having the ability to opt out and unsubscribe from an organization, but for that organization being required under the Act to actually delete and remove all data that relates to a particular individual. Now, won't that be fun? Look, our European colleagues obviously have managed to get this done and be compliant with the GDPR. So the good thing from our point of view here in Australia is we're not breaking new ground here. This is stuff that the Europeans have had to do, and also Californian organizations have had to do. The state of California has its own GDPR-style Privacy Act as well, which is quite similar. So the other thing that the GDPR does is it gives people the ability to actually request their personally identifiable information be shared with them within a reasonable time frame. And I think that reasonable time frame, from memory, is like 2 or 3 days. And it must be in a format that is easily digestible, and probably an Excel file is the most common way to be able to share that sort of information. And I'll show you here a little bit later today how custom objects can become a valuable tool to help you. So the focus is definitely on the PII data, or personally identifiable data, and you'll start to hear that term a lot more over the coming months. But the other thing that you may or may not recall, now the GDPR came in, oh gosh, Adrian, you might have to help me here. I want to say it was 2017 that the GDPR came into being.
Yeah, I think it was. It was.
Yeah, thank you. And so what we saw, and you may remember this, there was a flurry of emails that we all received from any European entity saying, hey, you need to opt in again. We need you to opt in again and agree to certain terms and conditions, etc., that fall under the GDPR. So we have an expectation that we may have to do a similar thing here in Australia. So that's really just a heads up for you to think about and potentially plan for. Now, we won't know for sure until after August and we see the act, but it's a fair expectation that we may need to do. So again, you can scan the QR code there, and I've got one more for you, one more code for you to scan. So other early indicators is that we can certainly expect small businesses to no longer be excluded. So small business had a little bit of a scapegoat based on their revenue size. They didn't have to adhere to some of these things, but that's no longer the same, no longer the case from what we understand. And all companies will need to behave the same way. Now, what does that mean for the education sector, the not-for-profit or for-purpose sector? And what does it mean for political parties? Political parties have always been exempt from these things. If you've wondered why you might get spammed by political parties, it's because they can, and there's no legal recourse for them to stop doing it. So kind of handy that. But there could be implications for education. There could be implications for the not-for-profit and for-purpose industries. But again, we don't quite know that just yet. The only thing we really know about education is a tightening up of emailing underage persons. So and 18 seems to be around the figure. So if you think about universities targeting high school students in the sort of years 11 and 12 space, that could become a little bit more problematic in relation to what's needed. But again, our European colleagues and friends have worked this out, so hopefully we'll also be able to work it out. I'm sure we will. So that's kind of it in relation to what we know so far in relation to the changes with the Privacy Act, other than we absolutely wanted to make sure you're aware, because this will land largely on you guys, right? I'm looking at everybody who's on the call today. This will fall to you. Obviously, you'll need to consult with in-house counsel or an external law firm. And actually, as I look down the list today, we have a few marketers on the line today who are from Australian law firms. So if you've got any input or anything you feel you could share with us, we'd love to hear from you. I have actually scoured a number of law firm websites and have taken some of that blog content that they've done and consolidated some of that into our microsite. So you'll find links on our microsite to take you back to read the full articles, etc., from some of those firms. So they're doing a great job. So we probably should nice shout out and thank you to them for the work they're doing. All righty, so let's jump in, and now let's try and put the legislation aside and focus on our customers, our prospective students, our members, and put them at the center of the discussion that we're trying to do. And the key thing that we know from all of the research and certainly the COVID period and the pandemic changed the behavior of a lot of consumers. And I'm sure you've seen that yourself. And expectations are certainly different than they were, say, 5+ years ago or sort of pre-2020. And the key thing they want is choice. And so what can we do today to help them achieve that and get the choice they want? So what does Eloqua do today? How does Eloqua manage a brand new person or a net new individual coming into your platform? As soon as a contact reaches Eloqua, now they can reach Eloqua from a variety of ways, and I'll expand on that here in a minute. But Eloqua assumes that you have opt-in processes in place. So as soon as that contact comes into Eloqua, their date and time stamped, etc., as being globally subscribed. So that term globally subscribed and typically means the same thing. We use those words reasonably interchangeably, right? So as soon as they're created in Eloqua, they're subscribed globally. And it's at that point that you should then be aiming to entice them to kind of do a bit more. You know, is it specific interests they have or email groups, etc., that they might have? All right, so the starting point. So maybe a visual can help convey this. So if we think about an unknown contact, someone Googling, they Google whatever the subject is, they arrive at your either preference center, or maybe it's just an Eloqua landing page with a form, or maybe it's simply a website page of yours with a form on it. So that form, they submit the form. If that form is integrated into Eloqua, they come into Eloqua, and at that point, they're known as a known contact. Now we have an email address, first name, last name, hopefully, and the basic information that would be there. Now, from Eloqua, that information begins to travel, and it can travel to the CRM platform, just as one example. But we can also move it to an Eloqua custom object. And this is what I was referencing earlier. And one thing that we've learned from the GDPR experience is that the custom object can become a very helpful tool to store that information, specifically the PII, that personally identifiable information, and hold it for perpetuity. It's kind of there forever. So if in 5 years' time, little Johnny Smith insists that he never opted in to hear from you, you can go back to your custom object and say, hi, Johnny, on the 13th of July, 2017 at 2:45 Australian Eastern Standard Time, you opted in because you filled in a form on our website that offered you XYZ. And so you're done. Look, it's probably not little Johnny that you would ever need to answer to. It's probably the ACCC. That you would need to answer to. So yeah, so that's a really helpful tool for the custom object usage. And that's one thing that we've actually assisted some European clients with in managing the GDPR compliance within Europe. Now, of course, the CRM is not the only place that data can come into Eloqua, and consideration needs to be given to what does that look like. So if someone's coming in from an ERP or the CRM or any other platform, our ecosystems today obviously are fairly extensive. It's not just simply Eloqua and the CRM. There's a lot more to it. So what we don't know yet is what that means from a CRM. So I'm a salesperson, or maybe I'm working in the call center. I take an inbound call, speaking to Mary. She's delighted, wants to get a little bit more information on a few different things. And so I put her details in, throw her into a campaign because that's what she's requested. But this is all verbal. Okay, so how does that get managed? What proof do we have that Mary actually opted in to marketing communications? Are all calls in the call center recorded? Are they associated? Yeah, there's just a lot of questions that we don't have answers to yet. Obviously, you can think about some quick ways to do that. Maybe the first email that goes out to Mary is not the document she requested, but actually a request for her to opt in to marketing communications so that you can then in turn send her the information that she requested. Feels a bit clumsy, but maybe that has to be what we do. We don't know yet, but we will get there. So the key thing to think about here is how are people coming into your Eloqua platform, and what ability do we have to manage that process? All right, so let's kind of think a bit more basic in relation to how Eloqua manages your preferences today. So we know already that Eloqua will opt people in as soon as they enter the platform. They're subscribed globally. We know that. And you can see that within Eloqua. So if you go to the contact within Eloqua, you'll see it's under the preferences area. You can see I'm subscribed globally. And over on the left-hand side, depending on the view that you have selected, you can also see date created. And so that date created is not a field that updates every single time something happens. It's created once, the data is entered, and that's it. It never changes. So that's it. Okay, so you know when they came in. We'll talk a little bit more about other information that you can capture. But now, once they're opted in, the key thing we want to do now is kind of get them excited. And this is where the preference center concept really comes into play, with getting people to subscribe to different email groups. Now, email groups, as you know, within Eloqua, you can't send an email unless you have an email group assigned to a particular email. Now, of course, we don't use the term email group. We start to give them far more friendly names, right? It might be newsletter, it could be in-person events, webinars, et cetera, as you move through. And now there's kind of no limit to these, or look, I'm sure there is a limit, but I've never reached the limit. And you certainly don't want to go nuts here. You don't want to have hundreds and hundreds of email groups. It just gets unruly, essentially, and kind of reduces any effectiveness of reporting and so on and so forth. But your goal, essentially, is to get them to opt in, to subscribe globally, and then we want to try and help them expand. Now, if you've got multiple brands under a single business unit, then this may change things. Okay, so when people are opting in, what is it they're opting into? Are they opting into Acme Products Pty Limited, so a single business entity? That might be fine, but for our larger corporate or enterprise clients, in some cases, they may have different businesses and different entities using the same instance of Eloqua. And that's not going to be the same for everybody, but it's certainly the case for some. Even for some of our clients who are more international in their view of the world, they have a single instance of Eloqua. They trade under the same name in the various geographies, but they are different business entities. Does that change things up? Well, we need to figure out after August what that means and how to do it. The upside is don't worry about it. It can easily be managed. It's not a problem, but we just need to know so that things can be configured to accommodate that accordingly. So the key question, as I said there, is what are people opting into, and then what are they opting out of? So telco is a really good example. So if you think about your telecommunications provider, whether it's Vodafone, Telstra, whoever it might be, Optus, etc., they obviously want to market to you. Of course they do. They want you to upgrade new phones and get new services, new data plans, all that sort of stuff. But then they also have legislative requirements that they have to email you to let you know that the service is down or something else has happened. So these are more administration. They're not marketing emails. So we need to understand that and be able to differentiate between marketing emails to buy a new phone versus, hey, the network is down or there's been a data breach. We need to tell you that, et cetera, et cetera. So people can opt out globally. We still need to be able to factor in some way to communicate to those people, even though they've opted out of marketing communications. And again, that's fine. We can do that. It's no drama, but just make sure you're aware. That's all. When do you ask? Okay, so I didn't finish this one. My point that I wanted to make here was when do you ask the question about bringing people to the preference center? Should it happen really early in the conversation? Our suggestion is that it should. And let me show you an example. The benefit of bringing it in early is to make sure that you can tailor your communications as soon as possible. I try to make up an example here, and it just gets too hard with all of our different types of clients. So I thought I'd choose something that everybody knows. Everybody knows Hogwarts and what that might look like, and Harry Potter, etc. So work with me as we kind of go through this example. By bringing people to a preference center much earlier in the relationship, you get the ability to share with them what it is that you do, but also it's a chance for you to learn more about them and what they're interested in and why they've just given you their email address and why they're actually engaging with your platform. So you might present different types of subscriptions to people. And look, there are plenty of options to play with here. A subscription number one could be a fairly general subscription, and this may be pretty much just opting in, and this is kind of the baseline. So it could be, student life at Hogwarts, why study magic, meet our muggles, Ron study tips, probably not a very long campaign, that one. And safety first when casting spells at home, critical things to be aware of. So maybe that's the Hermione Herald. It's like a newsletter style format, and maybe that's all it covers. But then you want to offer something else. And so maybe we're now looking at in-person events. One thing that certainly came out of COVID was obviously doing lots of webinars, but then the differentiation, people have preferences. They're not really interested in coming into town and necessarily going to a nice venue and whatever. They'd rather just get the information via webinar from the comfort of their office or home office or whatever that case may be. So in-person events may then be very specific to things like annual open days at Hogwarts or parent wizard evenings, etc., or Quidditch match days might be broadcast live. Obviously, they're in-person, but you'll see here in a minute when we jump to other ones that you can do webinar events, right? So maybe Quidditch matches can be broadcast live as well. So all of those things like virtual open days and maybe parent wizard evenings could also be done via webinar. So a live Zoom with a wizard versus having to come into the school or the campus to do that as a parent. And then you may have campaign specific subscriptions that you wanted to run. So a really good example of this one is the privacy and governance microsite that we've developed at Marketing Cube. So I would see that as a campaign specific subscription. We've created an email group specifically for that. It has its own infrastructure in relation to opting in and opting out and all that sort of stuff. And will be tightly controlled. Emails that we produce, which will have updates, will go just to those people who have subscribed to it. So that's another way to think about it. So that's just thinking about types of subscriptions that you'll do. We'll expand on those a little bit here in just a moment, but let's jump ahead. All right, so what sort of data should you be collecting from a preference center point of view? And the ability to ask the right questions is to help you build first-party data so that you can actually do something with it, right? But the critical one, the key one, is the opt-in. Okay, so I know there are still clients out there who on forms, for example, don't have checkboxes for opt-in. They may have different type of language. If you submit this form, you're agreeing to. For instance, I have a feeling that come August, that may need to get tightened up, okay, in relation to how we do that. And so we have to think about all the various forms that we've got. So remember, Eloqua will take care of this for you, but it's only one piece of the puzzle. This one really just impacts people coming into the platform and robustly from Eloqua forms, where there is an actual checkbox for them to tick and say, yes, I'm opting in to relevant communications. Again, we need to factor in what happens from the CRM point of view and other data sources coming into Eloqua and what that means and how do we confirm that they've actually opted in to receive marketing communications. Okay, so setting aside the opt-in, that's the no-brainer. Let's dive in and have a look. So we know that Eloqua captures that date and time. That's the critical one. So, but that in and of itself is good, but we really need more information because a person could turn around and say, well, and the ACCC could very well turn around and say, well, look, that's great, but how did they get in? What did they do? So that's where some of the UTM values that you've got sitting in browsers, for instance, and on relevant pages and forms, so lead source, lead campaign, lead channel, whatever those different values are that you're collecting, they could also be brought in and associated. And so you might remember earlier, I said that we could look at an example where we can go to that custom object and we can say, well, little Johnny opted in July 17th, 2017 at 4:55 Eastern Time Australia because he submitted a form that related to XYZ product on this page of our website. So we can then get very specific. Now, that level of granularity can easily be achieved. That's not a problem, but you just need to set it up. Okay. And so in Marketing Cube's world, this was something that we did a long time ago. And so as a user, it's not something that I really need to think too hard about. I just have some templates in place that I use to have continuity in the values that I'm assigning. And yeah, it just creates the URL, drop it in, it's all done. So, and that's obviously used for reporting and a whole range of different things. The other thing in relation to what sort of data should you be collecting is to think very hard about the data that you really need in Eloqua. So especially when you start to consider personally identifiable data. So in New South Wales, one of our ex-ministers who I think took care of social services is working very hard with government. He's now left politics and is consulting, which is not unusual. But he's doing some great things and looking at creating sort of a digital ID so that, for example, in Australia, many of you potentially have rented at some point or may still be renting. And you go through that process and the real estate agent typically wants, okay, I need, three copies of your last electricity bills. I need your bank statement. I need your passport. I need a copy of your driver's license. All of this incredibly personally identifiable information that then gets photocopied and stored in some filing cabinet in some real estate agent in some suburb in wherever you live, right? So they're trying to create a single digital process that is a form of ID backed by government data that can confirm to that real estate agent that you are who you say you are, etc., all that kind of stuff. The less we can even want to capture personally identifiable data is probably a good direction to go. But generally speaking, it's at the application point. So if we look at universities, it's at that application point that you capture a lot of that data. And really that data may not well even be in Eloqua. It'll be in some sort of platform that specifically manages applications. And in the financial services space, again, similar. We may use Eloqua in our marketing platforms to drive people to that point, but that point of actually applying for something typically falls outside of Eloqua. And so we need to think very carefully, do we need that data in Eloqua at all? Is it just easier and safer to keep it in its own secure platform that is designed for that particular purpose? If I think about a financial services example from a client of ours in years past, they were a credit card provider, and they had great data that flowed in from an ERP into their CRM. that showed credit card expenditure. So being able to look at the person who spends $20,000 a month on their credit card versus those who spend maybe 10,000 versus those who maybe, if they're lucky, spend a couple of $100 on their credit card. And they wanted to be able to tailor that information. So the easy solution was, yep, we've got the dollar figures sitting right here in CRM. Let's just bring that into Eloqua. But then we're like, whoa, hang on a minute. Do we really need to know the dollar value in Eloqua? So what we did is we created sort of a characterization of sort of gold, silver, bronze. You know, the $20,000 a month plus spend was a gold customer, silver and bronze. So then from an Eloqua point of view, and as the marketing team, we're not looking at lists of people with individuals and their monthly spends. We're just simply looking at gold, silver, bronze. That's it. Hardly identifiable, a little bit of an indicator, but not identifiable. There are other ways to present data in Eloqua from your various systems. They don't necessarily have to be the actual data that is sitting in other source systems that you've got. So that brings me to the point of forms, okay? And forms is obviously the entry point into your system. And the challenge is, and you've been using Eloqua for quite some time, you probably have loads of forms, okay? And these forms are great. They're wonderful. They're easy to put together. They're efficient and so on and so forth. But how many of them do you have out there that are currently still live, that are not redirected and so on and so forth? And again, Eloqua was only one part of the puzzle, right? So who else in the organization is using forms to request people submit information? And so my question to you would be then, well, you know, who are the form gatekeepers within your organization? Is it just marketing, or is it IT, or does the service team have the ability to throw a form up and have it live on the net and get people to put information in? So when I talked about this enterprise-wide discussion, that's part of what I mean. We need to look beyond marketing. We need to talk to our friends over in service and sales and elsewhere in the business to make sure that any of those forms that are coming in are correctly collecting the right sort of data. Again, I had a discussion probably a couple of years ago with a client where the CMO confessed to me, first of all, Derek, I've got about 30,000 contacts in Eloqua that I've got no idea how they got into Eloqua. First problem. Then as this was some time ago, as they were trying to get a little bit more robust in relation to opt-ins and capturing that information, you know, she confessed again, there's a large portion of people that I really do not have any evidence to suggest they've actually opted in to receive our marketing communications. So we don't want to be in that situation, and nobody wants to be in that situation. So there are things we need to do to think about that. And a preference center is just one entry point amongst many entry points, but it's one that we can certainly have some control over and make happen. Now, to avoid all of those different forms, it's probably difficult because we know we need forms. You throw up a white paper and you want people to access it and you want some very specific questions to present, etc. Well, it's an individual form, and that's perfectly okay that it's an individual form. The challenge comes when you go back to a form that you did last year and you go, okay, well, I'm just going to save as that form. Because come post-August, that form is probably the wrong form and probably does not contain the right processing steps and the bits and pieces that you need for it to conform with the Privacy Act. So this means a little bit of a rethink in relation to using of templates. And probably a good practice to get into is just avoid saving as forms, which if you've worked with me for quite some time, you'll know I always say that. Forms are just not a good thing to be doing a save as of. There are smarter ways to do it, and templates is the smart way to do it. So we have an optimization service to help you with that. There was a QR code at the beginning of the show. It's interesting. But we'll include a link to that also in our post-event comms for you so you can get a little bit closer and understand that. But think about one of the discussions we had with a client recently was around them doing this process within their organization. And what they found was there was a big discrepancy across the organization about what they believed was the baseline information that they needed. And so it was a good discussion process to go through. It really has helped them consolidate what their forms look like and agreeing is sort of a minimum amount of data that's needed. This does fall a little bit into that whole MQL discussion, moving MQLs over into sales as a sales accepted lead. But that discussion in and of itself doesn't apply to everybody on the call today. It's a little bit different for everybody. But let's have a think about that. So remember with your forms, if we take forms at a very basic level, they essentially happen in two parts. And I'm putting my customer hat on here, looking at your forms as I would see them as a customer. So I would see at the front end, first name, last name, email address, company name, what's my favorite color, blah, 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 all those sort of questions you might ask. They're the visible fields. In the back end, though, which they don't see, are the hidden fields. And it's those hidden fields that enable us to capture things like those UTM values. So if we want to push data into a custom object where we then have the ability to capture all of that detail about exactly how they came to be in our instance of Eloqua, when that opt-in was captured and how and which website, which form, etc. It's all through those UTM values that we can pull in and then post to the custom object that will make all the difference. So to give you a little bit of an idea, think of this as like a wireframe more than anything else. So this is the Hogwarts subscription and preference center. So first thing you may present to people is information about the person. So who are they, their name, their email address, maybe some geographical questions, etc. Kind of basic profile information. If it's more B2B, it could be which industry they work in, that sort of stuff. Then underneath that, we may ask about subscriptions. Okay, now you might recall we talked a little bit about this earlier, right? So the different email groups and giving those different names, etc. So these would be the subscriptions that you might be offering. And then from there, we would move then into preferences and interests. Okay, so you'll notice one of those email groups was newsletters, for example. So if I'm filling in my Hogwarts detail and I get to preferences, maybe I'm interested in understanding muggles better and trying to cast spells. What type of spells do I want to do? And so I've said, yeah, I'm really interested in spells. So maybe we have a newsletter that is all about spells, or maybe we have a newsletter that contains a key article that talks about spells. So not only do I have the ability to capture everybody who's interested or subscribed to my newsletters, but I can then also tailor who will get that based on the preferences or interests that they have expressed. The subscription here is just like, as I said, like a magazine subscription delivered to your door. I think this was probably like 1984. But people used to do that, by the way, used to get subscriptions and things sent to their door like a magazine, and you can turn it on or off. It's not opting out of hearing from the brand, but I can unsubscribe and subscribe as I choose to. So that's the purpose of the email group. Then below that is preferences or interests. What are my interests? What am I really trying to understand? Why am I engaging with your brand? What is it I'm trying to learn? What is it I'm trying to understand? And so whether you're financial services, whether you're in education, whether you're in manufacturing, doesn't really matter. There'll all be a whole range of interests that you could present to people to have them tell you a little bit about them. Another great question that we like to ask sometimes is to get the person to select from a predefined list. And the question could be something like, which of these statements best describes you? So put it in their language and then use that value in the back end to tailor various communications. Okay, I can just see there's a couple of Q&A there. One from Alex. Oops, now I'm sharing the kimono. Sorry, Alex, won't be a sec. So if a person has engaged with a newsletter previously, but hasn't specifically opted into newsletter as a group, is it okay to continue? Okay, this is a great question, Alex. So remember, there's two constructs at play here. There's the opting into your brand. And once a person has opted in, as far as Eloqua is concerned, you can send them anything you want. And I think pretty much by way of legislation, if they've opted in, you can send them anything you want. The whole purpose of the email group is to have them identify to you what they're actually interested in. So when it comes time to send out a particular newsletter, the first port of call is, well, let's find out everybody who has specifically subscribed to that particular, or to newsletters. And then I'm going to add other people to that because they've looked at pages on our website recently that talk to that same topic, or they've engaged in other campaigns that also talk to that same topic. So they may well also be interested in that particular newsletter. I don't see email groups as the ability to exclude people necessarily. It's just a baseline. But the nice thing that the email group does out of the box is it does give people the ability to unsubscribe from just that newsletter, just that email group, if they want to. Doesn't mean they've opted out of hearing about anything else. They just don't want that newsletter anymore. But they're still subscribed. They're still opted in. You can still invite them to webinars. You can still do other types of comms. Hopefully
You
that.
wouldn't, sorry, Derek, I was going to expand on that, but you wouldn't add them to the newsletter subscription group though, right? You would just add them to the segment.
Oh, correct. To the segment. Yes, thank you. Yeah. So it's and yeah, correct. So I'm not going to subscribe them because I think that's what they'd like. I'm just going to add them to the segment for the campaign because I think that's what they'd like based on their behavior, their digital footprint that they've done. Jessica then asked the question, if a webinar registration form already had a disclaimer notifying the person they will be opting into marketing if they fill out the form, would you still recommend adding a tick box? So, Jessica, as of today, I would say no, I think that's okay. But the challenge is we don't know what that means with the new legislation. So, one thing we do know today is that you can't pre populate an opt in. So, Marketing Cube, what you may or not have noticed is when you fill in our forms, because certainly as I look at this list today, nearly everybody here, this is not your first experience with the user group. So, you've opted in previously. And so that's why we have the opt-in pre-populated, because Eloqua is smart enough to know that you've previously opted in. So we just save you the step. Okay, you've already done it. But if you've never opted in, it's blank and you're required to check the box. Now, post-August, that may not even be permissible. So it's a great function within Eloqua. We love it. It makes it a little bit easier for you. But yeah, we don't know what that's going to look like until the legislation's available, Jessica. But look, it's a really valid question, and one that we hope to have a better, more robust response for you come August. And then tailoring campaigns was kind of that last part of the exercise. So and then we kind of just talked about that then in relation to that scenario. So it's about combining profile data, engagement data with their expressed preferences and bringing that all together mixed with subscriptions. In the past, some people have misunderstood the concept of the email group, that I can only send people a newsletter email if the email group in Eloqua says they're subscribed. No, that's not the way I've always used email groups. I use email groups to tell me that that's my baseline. That's the absolute minimum that I've got in relation to who's going to receive the newsletter. What I will then do is apply other filters to find other people who, through their digital behavior or potentially through their profile, may also, I think, find that information of value. We do that occasionally with the user group. So depending on the topic, we've obviously got those of you who have expressly subscribed, but occasionally different topics will come into play that we think that maybe the CMO, the marketing director may also want to be aware of. Now, those people have opted into Marketing Cube, but they're not necessarily subscribed to the user group. So I'll send them an email. Well, usually it's me sending it, but it comes from Adrian, encouraging them to maybe talk to their teams and say, hey, guys, maybe you should be looking at this next particular subject of the user group, etc. So that's one example, Alex, that I would use to do not just the subscribers, but also those who may, I think, find the information of interest. So if we go back to a Hogwarts scenario, and how does having a preference center change the way we build out a segment? Okay, so we're going to go with a Hogwarts open day, and it's a hybrid event. So it's in-person and virtual hybrid event. So step one is, well, let's get our baseline down. Who has subscribed to both in-person or virtual events? That's our baseline of individuals. Number two, do we know the types of spells they're actually interested in studying? So do we have a specific preference that they've talked about or shared with us? Now, would they prefer reminders by SMS or maybe Hedwig the Owl? If you're a real hardcore fan of Harry Potter, you will get that. So what's their preference for reminders? Maybe it's just email. They don't want an SMS, but let's give them some options. And then we can activate the campaign. So we can really tailor that experience based more on the profile information that we have. And we've certainly got a number of clients who do this tremendously well in relation to the way they present different preference centers. And last month, we talked a little bit more about landing pages and how you can really personalize those landing pages through our friends at Atlas and Les Mills and what they've done. Two very different examples, but use cases of landing pages. So take that same thinking of that personalization and apply that to your thinking for a preference center. One other thing I wanted to show you was, sorry, I'm sharing multiple pages here. So this is our preference center. Yeah, so this is, if you go to our website and you go to a menu about us and you select subscribe, then you arrive here. And you'll see a next button, etc. However, if you receive one of our emails, which is, for example, this one, and maybe I decide I want to click on unsubscribe or manage my preferences. Now, FYI, clicking on either of those two buttons will actually take you to the exact same place, by the way. So unsubscribe. So this here is exactly the same as this. It's actually the same page within Eloqua. Now, this is a source editor created page. My amazing team upstairs of our geniuses developed this for me. The difference being, I figure if somebody's clicking on a footer to unsubscribe, it could be the end, right? It could be that they just don't want any more. So what I didn't want to do was have them go through a process of having to, now this would pre-populate, if they were coming from the email, it would pre-populate, etc. As you can see, this one has pre-populated essentially, but I put it all on a single page. So I can see what I'm subscribed to. If I was subscribed, it would, show various things like this. This is how we present the idea of the preferences or interests that people might have, okay? Am I interested in marketing automation? Is it campaign design? Is it all about leads, whichever? And you can see here, this is already ticked because I've previously opted in. And there's the button we all hate at the bottom, which is please unsubscribe me from all emails, okay? So that's the global opt-out or the globally unsubscribed solution, okay? So I just wanted to show you that as an example and something to think about in relation to the way we deliver the experience. That the preference center doesn't have to be a static single thing. It can actually be different based on how I get to it and how I reach that particular page. All right. So in relation to the next release of Eloqua, we know it's due in August. At this stage, we're right at that cusp where the product marketing team don't release all the information until about the 11th of this month, 11th of July. So unfortunately, we don't know anything at this point. But if you want to subscribe, you can scan the QR code there and subscribe to our Eloqua Important Updates, which is kind of the quarterly update that you'll get with more detail about the relevant things that are happening and what we can expect with Eloqua. And then if you're not using the Redwood experience, I'd encourage you to rethink that. If you're not sure how to access Redwood, again, go ahead and scan the QR code called Redwood Experience. That'll just take you to an Eloqua landing page with a very short video. It goes like 2 minutes and shows you exactly how to turn Redwood on as an individual user within the platform. So we're a little bit over by 5 minutes. So thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your input. Thank you very much. Oh, we have Malcolm. Just a quick question there. Would love to see the back end of your preference center. That sounds a bit personal. Landing page and form sliders and interest boxes are a great idea. Thanks, Malcolm. Absolutely. And we'd be more than happy to share that with you and walk you through what we've done. Absolutely. So, Adrian, I'll leave that with you to liaise with Malcolm on that one.
Will do. And Derek, I was just going to flag quickly Casey Ann's question as well. She came in and asked a question just about pushing information to the custom object, which I answered, but just could be of interest. So essentially, can you capture the see when a contact unsubscribed, what they clicked on and the time and date? So the answer is yes for unsubscribe. And obviously capturing what they clicked on, as well as some of the other things you've mentioned, will depend on the CDO configuration. And so that's probably just something that we need to make sure it's set up to capture all the information that you want in that custom.object.
All right, thank you. Sorry for me jumping around screens there for a bit. Yeah, so we'll get information out to you as soon as we know it. Would love for you to subscribe to the privacy and governance registration. We'll have more information to you shortly on how you can subscribe to that. It's not on our website just yet, but probably will be by Friday this week. But otherwise, you'll certainly get an invitation to subscribe via email from us. Thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you very much.